You're listening to the relaxing, soothing, and stress-free sounds of Sacramento Smooth Jazz.
Welcome back to Sacramento Smooth Jazz. Today we have a special treat as we speak with a true maestro. That's right. He's made his mark in the world of contemporary jazz and is now embarking on a new chapter in his career. Our guest today is talented keyboardist and singer-songwriter Jayson Tipp. With his musical journey spanning nearly 3 decades, Jayson Tipp has captivated audiences all over with his unique blend of pop, rock, and even folk influences, all woven together with heartfelt lyrics, catchy melodies, and amazing vocals. But that's just the beginning of Jayson's musical story. He's not only an exceptional solo artist, but also the visionary founder of an ensemble that has showcased his musical brilliance. And now he's embarking on a new solo adventure with his upcoming album, Table for One. So get ready to be transported into the world of musical excellence as we delve deep into the remarkable career of Jayson Tipp. Welcome, Jayson, to Sacramento Smooth Jazz. How are you today?
Oh, I'm good. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate that. Yeah, that was a really warm welcome and introduction.
It's your history. You know, it is you. We're talking about you. You set this stage, and I'm grateful that you have given us some time today. I know you're really busy, and especially with your latest single. You have 2 new singles that came out this year, and they're both very good, and I featured them on the show, and I want our listeners to know about you, man. So you're out there in Portland, Oregon, right?
Portland, Oregon, yeah.
Yeah, so some great music's coming out of Portland. More and more folks are starting to hear about Portland. You're putting them more on the map, man.
Well, I'm one of many talented folks that live in Portland. There's a lot. What's interesting is I moved here not knowing that, but there are quite a few people who are from Portland who are on the national or international stage working with major headlining artists, right? There's a group of players from Portland who are in Gino Vanelli's band, for example, and he's been pulling people out of Portland for years. There's the group Pink Martini, which is based out of Portland and is known internationally, and there's just some great talent here.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that you're there as well, because you're doing some wonderful, wonderful things in the arena of music. Now, your music has evolved over the years. I've been looking at your information here, and I'm like, wow, he has blended so many genres like pop, rock, and folk into your sound. Can you share with us any key influences and even experiences that have shaped your musical fusion in your career?
Well, I just grew up in the 70s and 80s in terms of listening to music. So I don't even know if we call it classic rock anymore, rock from the 60s and 70s and soul music. And when I was young, some of my favorite bands were artists, Stevie Wonder or Steve Winwood's band Traffic, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Steve Miller Band. But then because I played jazz in jazz band in junior high and in high school, I began listening to jazz at that time. And of course, there was the kind of crossover stuff that George Benson was doing that kind of was popular. And Chuck Mangione at that time, the Feel So Good album kind of was more pop oriented and started to pull people in. And then I got turned on to Weather Report and Pat Metheny, a huge Pat Metheny fan, and early days of Jeff Lorber and Chick Corea's Electric Band, and Return to Forever, and then Chick Corea's Electric Band. So all of those influences were coming together at a time when I was starting to write music and play music on my own. In the early 80s, as I was starting to do this on my own and not just sit and read music and play music that was transcribed for me by somebody else. And so all of those things kind of came together because I wasn't at that time as a keyboard player, didn't have the Chick Corea chops, and really still don't today. But I had the desire to kind of emulate that kind of music, but it just came from, I would say, more of a pop orientation, if you will. And that's really kind of carried through today, even though it's become a little bit more sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a roller coaster over the years in terms of the music.
Your experience shows in the music. When you have that kind of influence, you can hear it when someone's playing. And I get curious when I hear arrangements. I listen to music all the time. And so I hear various things and it raises questions for me like, wow, I wonder where they got that from. What was their experience? What made them think to add that part there? And so I listen to music a little bit different than many people because I hear it all the time. I'm enjoying your music and I can see now how you're blending it all together. I'm curious too, is that with respect to your upcoming album, now you're debuting as a solo artist after decades of collaboration. What inspired that transition to go on your own, and how has that creative process been
Yes, it's been an interesting journey. So Under the Lake has always been kind of my project. I've been the motivating force. I've had a variety of different, very talented people working with me over the 30 years next year since we released the first Under the Lake album. There's been a core group of those folks that I've worked with for most of that time, but almost, I would say 90% of the tracks that we've recorded were written by me exclusively or with one of the other players in the band. There's some great tracks that we recorded that on my list to perform every time I perform that were written by other people that were involved in the band. It was always sort of my creative outlet. So I never felt like I needed to have another outlet for my solo material, or never thought about it that way. I also didn't really have the desire to be the person. It was a band. It wasn't the Jayson Tipp band. It was Under the Lake. And I never wanted to be essentially the name above the title, if that makes any sense. I like the idea of being in a band, and I like the idea of surrounding myself with really talented people so I learn and they challenge me and I'm stretched. But we recorded an album in 2020 and came back and recorded another album in 2021. We did some interesting things and it was fun, but what struck me is the music we weren't seeing the success that I thought we should see. And one of the guys who's been associated with the band for a long time, good friend Quentin Gerard W., has for quite a while, maybe the last 20 years or so, been recording solo albums. And we were talking about that, and he's had some success recently. It's had 2 great tracks out in the last year that have been on the top of the Billboard charts. And he's got a super talented son, Lamette, who's a really talented guitar player who's doing really well these days on smooth jazz charts as well. But Quentin said to me, maybe you should just think about working with a producer and doing something that's just you. And I kind of scratched my head about that. And I thought, well, I should at least explore it. So I got connected to Darren Ron and I had a conversation with Darren Ron. And I don't remember everything that was said in the conversation. It's probably not worthwhile to share it, but just through the course of the conversation, he was just very thoughtful about asking me about my influences, and from his experience, also providing the feedback that, the way that you express yourself when you're in a group setting versus an individual setting is very different. So I said, well, let's do one track. Let's see where it leads. And Darren was really good at giving me feedback, both as a producer, but also as a coach, sort of in a very thoughtful way, giving me advice about things I could do to just better bring out what I was trying to do. Like, he could hear things and he would say, if you did it this way, if you did it that way, I think you'd kind of get out what you're trying to get at. And that tune we did together, Groove Together, came from, it was an idea I had that he enriched. So, we wrote the song together, but part of it wasn't somebody else's music given to me that I was then playing. It really was an expression of who I was. And he just helped me refine that. And that was such a rewarding process that even before we got the song completed and mixed and out, I had made up my mind at that time that I was just going to do a whole solo album, because I knew at that point that there was something that I could do as an individual artist that would be different.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking with keyboardist and singer-songwriter Jayson Tipp, and we're talking about his latest release. Now, Jayson, you were talking about Under the Lake. You were speaking about the album that you guys had released for your solo project, Old Friends, New Grooves, right?
Yes, yeah, that was the latest one, 2021.
You being a part of that, definitely you've written some things there, and it's interesting too that how you're referencing Quentin Gerard and then his son, Lamech, and a lot of people don't know that that's his son. So to see how you're surrounding yourself with greatness, and you have been for over a number of decades, and how here you are working with Darren Ron on your latest single that you released this year, Groove Together. I was going to ask you, actually, you answered to my next question with respect to that particular track. I'm going to ask you to walk me through the creative process, that synergy between you two, and you've done that. So thank you for making my job easier.
Well, I could even add a little bit to that. I mean, what I did was I have lots of musical ideas all the time. So and I'm sure other people in my shoes do the same thing. I sit down and I kind of really quickly get the idea down. So it might be 8 bars, it might be 16 bars, it might be the outline of an entire song, but maybe 30 seconds of it or a minute of it. And I focus, there's certain things I focus on. I'm, as a songwriter, as a player, I'm really focused on the bass groove and the keyboard voicings. Those are the two things, because I'm a huge Steely Dan fan. So that's one of the things I take away from Steely Dan, is those chord voicings and always a great groove. And so I think I had 16 ideas like that, 16 sketches. And I started talking with Darren, and I said, look, he goes, do you need a song, or do you have material? I said, well, I got 16 ideas that I would typically take and work into something. And he said, well, wow, 16 is a lot, but give me a couple days. I'll listen to them. I'll give you feedback. So he came back and he said, there's one or two that I think we could work on and have a chance of, going somewhere that makes sense to me. Great. We only need one. So let's start with one. And he picked this one that ended up being grooved together. He liked some of my ideas and some of my other ideas, or he just came back and said, rather than doing A, B, and C, let's do A, B, and X. And you go to that different chord. And then he would toss that over to me, and then that would send me down a different path. So, and there were a couple of times where he'd throw something to me and I'd go, okay, let me add on to that idea with this idea. And I'd throw it back to him. He's like, oh, wow, I would never have done that. But I see, yeah, that's what makes it sound like you. And then it was a very different approach to playing, to being a solo artist as opposed to being the keyboard player with other instruments sort of taking the melodies. It's me carrying the melody through the entire tune, which was new. And then I typically have not played acoustic piano on recordings. There's probably a handful over the last 30 years where I played acoustic piano in a recording, and because I've always kind of naturally gravitated towards like an electric piano, like a Rhodes or something, or an organ. And Darren was like, yeah, I get it. But that's what your inspiration is. That's what your influence is. Joe Sample, huge influence. Bob James, huge influence. He's like, I think you'd really sound good on acoustic piano. If you played what you're playing there, that you played it on acoustic piano. It's funny, I'm kind of finding that I'm more comfortable on acoustic piano and tending to do that a lot more, even in older material where I would not have done that.
Wow. This is really, really, really nice. It's amazing when you have that type of synergy going back and forth that really creates the final product grouped together. So you've done a fantastic job with that. Now, in your journey, you've had moments of hiatus, and then coming back to the music scene. What kept your passion for music burning and having these breaks? How did that influence any artistic growth or direction with that hiatus? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, when I started Under the Lake, did the first album, I had a newborn daughter, and then my son was born about the time our second album came out. And, you really want to focus on raising the kids. So unfortunately, I wasn't generating enough income as a musician to really be able to support my family the way I needed to do. And I could make a good living doing something else, more of a day job. I tried to balance the three of those things for a number of years, but basically took a break from Under the Lake recording and performing from 1999 to about 2014. So it was about a 15-year period of time, and time flies. I didn't lose the passion during any of that time. Like, I continued to do stuff in my home studio. I continued to look for opportunities to recapture what I had with Under the Lake. But I could never find the same chemistry with another group of musicians, was living in a different part of the country and away from the guys that I had worked with. The ability to record remotely was not as well developed as it is today. And then I turned 40, and I was able to get the band together for my 40th birthday party. So I threw a big 40th birthday party. I was living in Seattle at the time. I was really honored by the fact that these guys were willing to set aside things that they were doing and come up to Seattle for a couple of days, rehearse with me, and then do a show. Do like a big private party, but we were the show. And that was 2005. So it was like, there was a touchstone in between that period of time. And then we recorded an album and released it in 2006, but we couldn't really keep the momentum after that. So there was another hiatus. Then when I got out here to Portland in 2012, I was determined. I was not a whole person when I wasn't doing music. It's not just a hobby. Like, some people like gardening might be a hobby for some folks, but some folks it's just like, it's part of who they are and they do it all the time. Music is part of who I am. And if you talk to my wife, she would say, yeah, he's never really happy if he's away from it too long. When I got to Portland, I was just determined that I was going to get back to it. And it took a while. Found a group of guys here that I started working with and performing locally, and started recording, and did one album in 2018 with some Portland area musicians, which was kind of a tribute to the Crusaders. It was all original material, but with a trombone and tenor sax up front, and in the style of the Crusaders from the classic Crusaders albums of the 70s. That just kind of created some momentum that, brought me here to this day. Because that album went out and I was doing an interview like this. Somebody called in and instantly I recognized the voice, and it was Quentin. And Quentin was calling in. He's like, "Hey, Jay, I'm listening to this. This is great. It's like the new album. We got to put the band back together, though, man.
Yes.
We got to put the band back together." And so we did. I wrote some new material and recorded the album that then got released in 2020. So, and it's just been kind of apart from COVID, things probably would have happened faster, but that's been the acceleration since that time. And this is just the culmination of it now. So it's sort of like, people talk about you being an overnight success it's like, yeah, well, after 30 years of working at it, sure. Yeah.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with keyboardist and singer-songwriter Jayson Tipp, and we're talking about his music, his journey, and of course, his recent releases this year that are just phenomenal. Groove Together came out earlier, and now we have another one that will feature. How can people reach you on social media or websites? How can they find you?
Yeah, very easy. So my website is JaysonTipp.com, and Jayson with a Y, JaysonTipp, JaysonTipp.com. My handle on social media is Jayson Tipp Music. So Facebook, Instagram, they're really the prominent platforms where you can find me. And there's websites, and there's underlake.com is out there, and they talk to each other. And the handle for Under the Lake is at UTL Jazz, just the initials UTLJAZZ. But yeah, we're easy to find out there. We're easy to find on streaming platforms. Just all you got to do is search.
You're not trying to hide, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. Just giving me some time so our listeners can hear about you more so, and to find out that connection between Under the Lake and you and that experience. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for the interest, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate having the opportunity.
Would you do us a favor? Would you introduce our listeners to your latest release that you have out right now so we can put that on for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So my latest single was co-written, engineered, mixed, and produced by Adam Hawley, that great guitarist Adam Hawley. And we wrote it together, includes some really talented folks on it, including my good friends, saxophonist Quentin Gerard W., Adam Hawley, of course, on guitar, Eric Valentine on drums, Mel Brown on bass, and Carnell Harrell doing additional keyboard work in the background. This is the new track. It's called Time to Roll.
And you're listening to it right here on Sacramento Smooth Jazz. Jayson, thank you for hanging out with me today.
Hey, thanks very much, Michael.
Thanks for listening to Sacramento Smooth Jazz. To continue listening to Smooth Jazz 24/7, follow Sac Smooth Jazz on social media and listen by going to sacsmoothjazz.fm.